Let's talk about the second myth, the myth of positive building pressurization. The myth really is simply stated, PTAC units can positively pressurize guest rooms. The reality is, PTAC units cannot pressurize building spaces because to positively pressurize a room using a PTAC unit, the following would have to occur. The amount of ventilation air pulled through the vent door would have to exceed the toilet exhaust volume. It is very unlikely that the operation of PTAC units will add any significant building pressurization, since virtually no outside air is brought into the room via the unit's fan. The second part is that the PTAC fan would have to be able to provide pressurization regardless of wind effects. However, wind effects will often overpower PTAC units and will actually draw air out of the vent door on the leeward or negative pressure side of the building. And the third prerequisite is the PTAC fan must operate at all times when the room is occupied for ventilation and at all times when the exhaust systems are operating for pressurization, regardless of what the guest desires. However, guest and building owner control of the PTACs usually results in intermittent fan operation. This will cause periods without positive pressurization, even if these units could add pressurization when operating. Myth 2 is very closely associated with myth 1 because room pressurization directly depends on the volume of ventilation air provided to the space via the PTAC unit in excess of the toilet exhaust air. This is true of both intermittent and continuous toilet exhausts, but moisture problems tend to be more severe when exhaust fans are continuously operated. However, in either circumstances, PTACs do not provide enough ventilation air to compensate for toilet exhaust, and thus space depressurization relative to outside conditions almost always occurs. If sufficient amounts of ventilation air were available to compensate for the exhaust air through the PTAC unit supply fan, then guest rooms could be pressurized. However, hundreds of investigations that we've done of problem building show that this virtually never happens. Figure 3 here summarizes some multiple pressure readings completed on a typical guest room hotel at a hotel located in Texas. These readings are common for many hundreds of hotels with PTAC units investigated over the last 30 years. The original system design included continuous toilet exhausts coupled with makeup ventilation air provided directly through the PTAC unit. As this chart shows, no matter what the operating condition of the PTAC, with the PTAC fan on, toilet exhaust fan on, damper open, damper closed, PTAC fan on, toilet exhaust fan on, even with the damper open, the PTAC fan on, and the toilet exhaust off, there was no way to pressurize the guest room, which is very typical of what we found in just about every operating hotel we tested. The other thing to note is that the fan was in high speed during this operation. But if you think back about myth 1 that was described to you earlier and how the actual fan interfaces with the outside air intake opening, it's very common to think that that fan is going to pull the air from the outside and push it into the room, but it never happens. Now, not too long ago, several years at this point, there was another PTAC that was developed by Walt Kritsky and is currently being mass produced by a national PTAC manufacturer. These units were made with a separate fan to supply air to the hotel guest room, irrespective of the PTAC fan. So theoretically, regardless of the fan on the PTAC was on or off, the makeup air fan in the PTAC should provide positive air pressurization to the guest room. As early as 2 years ago, when we did the last test on this type of unit at a limited service hotel in Alabama, the results show that even under these conditions with a hybrid type of PTAC unit that had an outside air makeup air fan could not pressurize the guest room. So how do you even determine that you've got a pressurized guest room? Well, this figure shows how we have done this in the past by looking at differential pressures across various boundaries of a guest room. Designers often assume that PTAC units can provide the volume of outside air as identified in the manufacturer's literature. The perpetuation of this belief is largely based on the fact that the manufacturer's specified air volumes cannot be easily proven or disproven using normal test and balance procedures. In fact, there is not a standard test and balance procedure for a PTAC unit that would help us comply with the ASHRAE standard 62.1. These consistent negative pressures have been found in all fan operating modes, including high speed with the damper door fully open. And they are not isolated to any particular type of hotel, type of guest room, or manufacturer. It's common to all of them. So this has led us to believe the PTAC units simply cannot pressurize building spaces or meet the manufacturer's specifications based upon the amount of air that the fans deliver.